glad you're here with us today. Looking forward to your questions. In the meantime, we're on day 44 out of 60 days, so we're in the home stretch. Of course, as you saw yesterday, the Senate Democrats released their budget. This afternoon at 1 o'clock, I believe, the House Democrats are set to release their budget. I'll be briefed on that a little bit later on today, so I don't have answers for you with the specifics to that budget in particular. We are still, though, over the course of the next few weeks, 2 weeks actually, we're going to be focusing on, property tax relief. We're going to be looking at the capital gains income tax that was just passed out of the House on party line, governor's energy tax. How will the House Democrats deal with the court's decision on McClary? And so there's a few hot issues that are before us still here over the next couple weeks. But I'm sure you guys have some questions as well. To my right is the House Republican Floor Leader, J.T. Wilcox, and I think I'll pass it over to Senator Braun.
Thank you, Leader Kristiansen. I'm State Senator Sharon Braun, and I am the Minority Deputy Leader. And unfortunately, Senator Schuessler is without a voice today, so I'm going to try to be the voice for our side. I've brought with me today Senator Braun, who is our Chief Budget Lead, and we look forward to answering your questions.
I know you guys haven't been briefed on the House proposal, but we did talk at the Senate Republicans yesterday about the Senate proposal. I'm just curious what the House Republicans think of the Senate Democratic proposal that was unveiled yesterday.
Well, I'll start off, although I think John is going to have more detailed information. First of all, it appears that they're doing it without additional taxes, which we agree with. The economy and the taxpayers have given us more than $2 billion of unexpected revenue, and we think that we should be able to do our job and provide a lot of property tax relief with those dollars, and I'm glad that the Senate did that. And I will turn it over for detail to John Braun.
So I would just follow up on what I said yesterday. I think I appreciate the work they did. I think it's a good disciplined start. There's many things in it that we agree with. The adherence to the 4-year balance, I think, is great. Their protection of the rainy day fund is good. Their effort to reduce property tax, I think that's a good start. I would like to see, not surprisingly, a little bit more given the $2.2 billion of additional revenue we have, but I appreciate their efforts there. So we're on the right path, and I also appreciate their efforts to largely stick to the bipartisan agreement on K-12 from last year. So these are strong things that bring support. There are some details in there that we obviously would probably make different choices on. We're trying to be helpful to the extent we can within our principles, and we'll see where it leads.
Not within the bipartisan deal on McClary last year. They're planning to spend an extra $1 billion to send to schools for teacher salaries. Is that within the keeping of that deal?
So it is different. When I say that, I'm for the most part in terms of structurally with levies, they stick to the deal. So they choose to spend $971 million to address the court's concerns with teacher salaries. I disagree with the court on that. The court has always said that it's the legislature's job to define basic education, to create the timeline. The court even adopted the timeline, created initially by the legislature, clear back, I think, in 2009. When we proposed our solution last year, we did fund it on time in school year 18-19 as we went through bipartisan negotiations, and I think those were very good faith by all sides. They made the case that the Democrats at that point made the case that if we phase it in over 2 years, it's better for the school system. It allows us to make investments for children to help them succeed and on a wide range of issues, whether it's for children living in poverty or for special needs children. It made the case, and we made a change in the deadline based on policy. Historically, the courts have said that's a good reason to change a deadline. For whatever reason in their decision last year, they didn't stick with that and have demanded an additional payment for salaries, which quite frankly is a constitutional requirement, but one that we think was reasonable to meet in school year 19-20. My concern, I guess, and that's a lot of way of saying that, I think is it totally inconsistent with the agreement last year? No. Is it in the spirit of investing in places where we can best help children succeed? I would say no. I think that we would be much better off focusing on investing in special education and in transportation, in places where we can see real impact to student success.
Representative Kristiansen, from what you can see, will there be a few votes in your conference to support repealing the death penalty?
Death penalty for us is an interesting one because there are several of us have a pretty strong support for the death penalty. Let me remind everybody that the death penalty that we have in Washington State was voted for by the citizens of the state of Washington in 1976 by 69%. That's how we came up with the death penalty in Washington State. And I think from our perspective, if we're going to change anything with respect to the death penalty, it was put into statute by the citizens of the state. I believe that then it should be something that we go back to the citizens and let them have a vote on. I think is a proper way of dealing with this. But I think many of the members have very strong differences of opinion on this. I don't think it's necessarily a partisan issue. I think it's a personal issue for a lot of people.
Do you see perhaps some support in the caucus for going ahead to repeal it even without a referendum?
Well, we haven't had that caucus. We have not had a caucus discussion on it yet. So until we do that, I would just be speculating at this point. Next question.
The property tax proposal that the Senate Democrats have it's 1 year. Do you have any plans for long-term permanent property tax relief?
Just to make the point, Kerry Condata and I dropped a bill, and I know that Senator Braun did before the session started to provide that 1 year tax relief because even at that point we had plenty of money available because of the economy to do that. And I think all of us are looking at ways of doing more permanent property tax relief, and I think Senator Braun has the most innovative idea of all.
There is a bill introduced today by the House that would do 2 years and use the rainy day reserve. What's the reaction and thought about that legislation if it comes up anywhere?
I saw it on the intro calendar this morning. I think there's a little over $900 million that's involved in that. I want to say that if it's the one you're referring to, Jerry, it's the one that Representative Sullivan moved forward on. Is that the one you're speaking of?
Spells out the title. The title
Yeah.
has the exact amount.
Yes, it was an interesting title on there. So much for the amendatory process, at least in the House. It was just introduced this morning, and so getting into the weeds as to how that bill really works, I've not yet, at least from myself, I haven't dug into the depths of that bill yet, so I'm not sure how it exactly works.
So members of the House, drug cost transparency is an issue that's kind of split both parties, along party lines in the vote in the House. I'm curious, what were some of the concerns that you had with improving transparency in the drug pricing process?
Well, it went out party line, as I recall. If I'm not mistaken, that bill was party line. And last year, if I remember right, there was only a couple yes votes on the bill. If this is the one that you're referring to. Is that correct?
It is 1541, improving drug cost.
I think you're right.
Yeah, and I know myself, somebody asked me, Dan, you voted for it last year. Why didn't you vote for it this year? I actually was not on the floor of the House last year when the vote was taken. And there was a misvote, which I actually went to the rostrum and changed my vote on. And so I have been consistent on that as far as my personal. Are you Max, by the way?
Yes, I am.
Okay, because I got a message that I haven't been able to return. And so that's what my personal history is on that. As far as the caucus goes on this, we want to make sure that we're doing what's best for all the citizens, but at the same time, we've got to be very cautious that this is one of those bills, and I'm not a healthcare expert on this, but my members that are healthcare experts cautioned us as to where this bill was really going. And I am a little concerned that the bill was going too far, and that was part of the issue that we had. As far as the specifics of it, I'd love to talk a little bit more offline because there's a lot of details to that particular bill.
So
Who else?
one of the reasons that Democrats keep bringing up different kinds of taxes is that they say they want to make the tax system more fair since the burden is so much on people with lower incomes. How would you make the tax system more fair without perhaps bringing in additional kinds of taxes?
Well, certainly the property tax relief bills that we have out there, and Senator Braun can talk extensively about that. This is not the time where we should be talking about re-evaluating our entire tax structure. We have our $2 billion additional revenue to talk about. I don't think that this is an appropriate time to be talking about generating additional dollars.
If you look at why we rank high on regressivity, the three things that really make Washington regressive are the cigarette tax, the alcohol tax, and the transportation tax. If you take those out, it changes our ranking entirely. Nobody's out there talking about those things, but if you really want to talk about how you address it, that's the key. Now, if you want to do some targeted tax relief to help make it more progressive, I think our proposal that offers a $100,000 homestead exemption for property tax is a good way to ease the burden on property tax and do it in a way that's very progressive. If you have a $100,000 house, that's a full exemption from state property tax. If you have a $500,000 house, it's a 20% reduction. So very, very progressive. We have the revenue from just under our current tax law to support that kind of change. It's got mixed reviews from the business community, but I think it's the right thing to do for our citizens. So we'll see if anybody's willing to take that up.
And I think a point to keep in mind is we're up in revenue over the previous biennium, I think by 15.5%, something like that. Almost double the rate of growth in personal income. So we have a tax system that is providing way more money than we should need, as a matter of fact. And I think we've got plenty of proposals that provide tax relief, and a lot of them are targeted towards the things that do add regressivity into the system. We just don't think that we need to take additional tax dollars from person A and give them to person B. There's enough tax revenue coming in right now to provide the tax relief that's necessary.
Well, and Representative Litton, out of her Finance Committee yesterday, passed on party line the capital gains income tax bill, which is an interesting one. And little education on that is that other states have started with a capital gains income tax, only to shortly thereafter switch to a full income tax. As a matter of fact, the facts are this: there is no state in the country, not one, that just has a capital gains income tax without an income tax. There are several states that started with a capital gains income tax that went full-on income tax, which, as we know, has been very unpopular amongst the citizens of the state of Washington on numerous occasions. It's gone down by very strong no votes by the citizens.
This year, Senator Braun, you were the budget chair last year. Now you're not writing the budget. So is there, there you got Democrat majorities. Are you involved? I'm just wondering what your take on the process is. Are you getting as much input as you would hope for? And if are you getting less or more than you gave them last year?
In the Senate, we've had a pretty bipartisan process up through the first couple. The way it works when you develop a budget, there's rounds. You have round one. It's really about learning about what's changed since you left session. What the potential puts and takes are, and we have historically sat through those rounds together with Ways and Means staff. Round two, the same thing, where you start to make the decision, and the chair is in a position to make those decisions, and will often take input. And I did last year, and Senator Rolfes did this year. And then at that point, you have to decide: are you going to run a bipartisan budget, which the Senate has done on occasion, or go it alone? And Senator Rolfes made a decision at that point to proceed with a Democrat-only budget. They're the majority. She gets to make that decision, and I respect that. It's very similar to the decision we made last year. But she's been very courteous and very helpful. The nonpartisan staff has been, they do their job for both sides without favor to one or the other. They understand that they need, ultimately there is a majority, and they're going to and if they can provide the votes to pass the bill, that they will do so. So I think it's been a very professional process. I have a high degree of respect for Senator Rolfes, and I think that she's doing a good job with the challenges she's got in front of her.
And I'd like to add to that, even last night, Senator Rolfes reached out to John and myself, and we met with Christine and David, and I think those are very productive conversations.
I mean, in the end, as a budget chair, you're trying to serve the principles of your caucus, but you're also trying to get to 25 in the Senate and 50 in the House, and sometimes you can do that within your caucus, and sometimes you can't. So you are wise to keep good relations with folks on both sides, and try to find a way that meets everybody's principles that is good for the state of Washington. I think that Senator Rolfes is trying to do that.
Aren't they going to need more than 25 votes in the Senate and 50 in the House to tap those reserves?
I think there's a path where you could do that. I think the enormous new revenue we have opens up that path maybe more than it has been in other years. it's really up to the majority to decide if that's a path they want. If there is, we've been pretty clear with what we would like to see to get us involved. You've heard it here several times. We're very interested in property tax relief, specifically in 2018. And many folks on the other side of the aisle share that concern. So I think that's something that could get us there. But we're gonna stay focused on that. We're gonna try and be helpful. We'll live within our principles. But if we can get to yes, we'll try to get there. We're not there yet, but we got some time to keep trying.
Property tax relief in 2018, not 2019?
We think that's the right time. I mean, when you look at the historic reform we did last year to our property tax system, it really, unfortunately, has an increase in 18 and then a decrease for most folks in the state of Washington in 19. It's 18 that's really difficult for many homeowners, and there is a way to do that. You've seen it put forth, I think, in at least one or two bills over here, but also in a bill from Senator Mullet and Senator Erickson in the Senate that allows constitutionally for some relief. Technically, it's relief against 19 property taxes, but it's allowed to be credited towards your 18 tax, so it would truly affect your second payment in 18, and we think that's the right time to do it.
I'm really encouraged that we're having a conversation about using this one-time money for a one-time solution.
Isn't that, if you go for 18, doing relief in 18, and going for a one-time solution, doesn't that get very convoluted and highly technical? I mean, there's about a couple dozen variables in there somewhere. Why not just hold off until 19 and do it in one, in sort of a nice, neat 1 year as opposed to...
Because 18 is where the impact is going to be felt the greatest.
This is the year where you have the increase, and it's really not that difficult. I mean, essentially what you do is you say, this is your reduction in 19. You can either make it mandatory or voluntary, but you can take that credit against your second payment in 18. It's a relatively straightforward process. It's been well vetted by the Department of Revenue. They think it can be executed, and it's not as complicated as it may sound on the surface.
Well, and it may be convoluted here, but it addresses the problem for the taxpayer in the time that they have the problem. And also, I thought, John, that the more convoluted it got, the better you'd like it.
No, believe it, I'm probably the simplest person in this room.
Who else has got a question?
Okay.
Switching gears just a little bit, where does your caucus stand right now on some of the proposed gun measures? As far as bump stocks or armed resource officers, other things along those lines?
Well, we've not yet caucused on the bump stock issue. Of course, that's just come over, and so we will be having that caucus real soon. But I want to make sure that we're really clear that if we're going to have this conversation, that it's got to be broader than just the gun issue, because I think there are a lot of things, as we all know, that are participating in this beyond just the guns. We've talked about the mental illness issue a little bit, but I kind of put together a list of some of the things that I think should be part of the discussion. You've got mental illness, we've got depression in there. That's been proven because of some of the meds many of these shooters have been on. We've got suicide issues, veterans issues. We've got gang violence. Let's even talk about family values a little bit and what's going on there. What are the things that are influencing a lot of the young adults that we have among us, and even children among us, be it videos, be it some of the programs that they're watching, things like that. I just think that if we don't talk about some of these things that, including, for example, we've got a bill that I mentioned last week that was originally introduced by a member of our caucus, Kevin Parker, who's now retired from the legislature, who was at Columbine during the shootings. He was a counselor there at Columbine. He knew most of the children that were killed in that horrific, shooting there. Using technology that we have today to deal with, so students can have an app on their phones where they can actually, if something's going wrong, we talk about if you see something, say something. We forget about the part that's probably the most important, it's do something. It's not just see it and say it. What are you going to do about it? And I think that's been part of the argument that's been missed in this whole thing. And so we want to make sure when we're having a conversation that it's an exhaustive conversation on everything that's attributing to the problem that we've seen across this country, not just one aspect of it. Because that may be the tool, the guns that have been used, but as we just saw recently in a person wielding a knife who killed even more people, that there's something that beyond just the tool that's being used here. And we want to make sure we're getting to the root of these problems. And so we intend on having a much broader conversation on this.
There's some amazing journalism that is emerging, and I think all of us that feel so deeply about this are taking the opportunity to study and inform ourselves as much as we can. And I know John Handy can provide copies of the things that I pointed out to him. There's a Mother Jones article about mass shootings, and the fact that the perpetrators, for the most part, don't fit what you normally think of as a pattern. And there actually are some comparisons to suicide clusters, and there have been some proven ways to intervene in suicide clusters. There's another article by 538 that is totally data-based, I think, that talks about all of the sources of death involved with weapons. And I think you're going to see a really serious effort here in the future to just start at the top of the list. What are the things that cause the most pain and grief and death, and what are most amenable to solutions? And if you look at the 538 article, for example, you're going to find that 2/3 of deaths related to guns in the United States are suicides. And we've had a start here in the legislature on suicide issues, and I think we're going to accelerate on that, because I think these are perfectly amenable to solutions that can come out of Olympia. And, we've got a good start. We're going to pursue that hard.
Well, and going back, if I may too, and continuing, I'd mentioned that bill related to apps on your phones. It's House Bill 2442 is the bill. It's a Manwiller bill. It did pass out of the Education Committee, but it died in the Appropriations Committee because of Democrat concerns. I hope that you're going to follow through with them and find out what were your concerns in allowing kids to be able to communicate if they're seeing a problem or hearing a problem, on a phone app, for Pete's sake, which our kids have all got, which in many cases would help curb a lot of these problems that we're having out there. A lot of these kids are seeing things. A lot of these kids aren't. I mean, it's their peers we're talking about, especially in the most recent shootings. And as we've interviewed a lot of these kids later, they've talked about, well, I'm just a kid. Well, this is a way of being anonymous and being able to, if you're seeing a problem, what can you do to help stop that problem? And that's part of the do something aspect of this that we just have not done a real good job of dealing with in the past.
This is an issue that's really important to me. I've worked on this since I've been here in 2013, suicide prevention. In the Tri-Cities, we had over 50 suicides last year alone. One suicide is one suicide too many. 50 is totally unacceptable. I've had community conversations with peer groups in the Tri-Cities, mental health professionals. We absolutely, as a state, need to start addressing these other issues. We need to be talking with kids as early as elementary school about depression, about how they're feeling, about access to resources. That's something that's incredibly difficult in this state, and that's why I've made it one of my priorities to work on access to resources for kids that are struggling, for parents that are struggling. There are several bills that I have that are out there that are addressing these, but until we get to the root of the problem, which is access to resources, talking about it, we're not going to solve the issue.
What specifically would the Republican caucuses like to see in increased access to school psychologists, counselors, mental health organizations? What specifics?
You named it. Yeah, absolutely. We need to have mental health counselors readily available. I've worked extensively with a pediatrician in my district, Dr. Thatcher Felt. He's a pediatrician, he tried to embed a mental health professional into his practice, ran into all sorts of problems with regard to billing codes, so now we're working with the Department of Health to correct some of those billing issues. It's providing that access to care. It's certainly recognizing that there are issues out there, recognizing that there are problems, but it's providing a pathway of solutions, and that's what the Republican caucus would like to see, increased access to solutions.
And it's not just professional mental health either, or mental health professionals. A lot of it is peer counseling. You've seen veteran-to-veteran programs. We're working on an agricultural worker program that would be in English and Spanish. And so much of this is, you may have heard Representative Graves talk about an epidemic of loneliness. And as most of you know, I don't really work in social issues very much, but because of an article in The Guardian a few months ago, it's become very plain to me that the highest rates of suicide are out in the rural world. And I think it's a product of a lot of economic insecurity and also loneliness and a sense that there's not a lot of people to help me, and I didn't grow up learning to ask for help. And there's an immense amount of progress to be made in this arena, and it's not partisan. You can see these things sailing through the House and Senate unanimously, and they're going to make a big difference, I think. And it's not exactly mental health. It is veterans talking to veterans, farmers talking to farmers. There's been some efforts in higher ed as well by Tina Orwell. And these are things that we can do, agree on, and make a big difference.
Representative Kristiansen, I was just curious which knife attack you were referring to.
I couldn't hear you, sorry.
You referred to a knife attack earlier. I'm just curious.
Yeah, there was an international knife attack that took place, but there was something else that happened if I could. Well, I was actually in Norway several years ago when there had just been a shooting here in the United States. And while I was in Norway, I have family there, by the way. You can probably tell by my last name. But there was a camp that was attacked by a single person. As a matter of fact, the camp's located on an island. And this person wielding a knife killed more than 24 kids at that kids camp while I was there. And it was interesting because the headlines in that country were talking about the shooting that had taken place in the United States. And it quickly switched. The headline switched to somebody with a knife, and the question was, is it the tool, or is there something else that's a foundational problem we have, not just in our country, but around the world? Because we all know this, and if you don't know, you should. More people are actually killed by knives than by guns, not just in our country, but around the world. And it doesn't matter what the tool is. Some are obviously, as we saw in Las Vegas, have the ability to do a lot more damage in a shorter amount of time. That being said, what is the underlying root problem that we've got that is driving this? Because it's turned into almost like an epidemic in not just our country, but around the world. And if we're not willing to face what the epidemic is or what the root cause of this is as part of our discussion, it's not going to matter what the tool is. We've got a problem here. And I think, if I may be so bold, and this is me personally, I believe there's a family values issue here. I truly believe that. I believe that we've seen the social economic challenges within our families related to jobs, related to a lot of the other issues, the drug abuse issue that we have in this country, the fact that we've got so many kids today that don't have families that are intact. I know I've seen it in my own family. All of us have seen it. And the struggles that those kids now becoming adults have had to deal with. When are we going to get down to the root issue here? And that's why we believe that needs to be part of the conversation. I want to thank you for being here today. We'll continue this discussion later. Thank you very much.